Well, thank you very much, Dr. Lee and the entire team that has put this together for us to be able to share this important information from across the world, and for inviting the American Red Cross to present what our work has been doing. During our response this year, we had to rethink some things that we were doing. Absolutely, our mission did not change. However, we needed to deliver how we would deliver Red Cross services within that mission did have to change. The safety of our workforce and our clients was of paramount concern and is. And the use of non-congregate settings for sheltering clients became the preferred during the pandemic. So the standard operating procedure of the past of having large convention centers, high schools, churches, that sort of thing, we really shied away from that this year for the multiple hurricanes, wildfires, and flooding that we had this year. I think our biggest thrill in this is the voice of nurses at the table. In our organization, it really became clear that it was what registered nurses knew that was going to help make our practice under COVID's sound and at the best levels. So a fairly large group of us who make up the majority of the Disaster Health Services volunteers in the American Red Cross developed the guidance on how we were going to respond to a natural disaster during the time of COVID. And our work started back in about February. A cadre of disaster health service leaders, we reviewed and revised guidance for sheltering, feeding, distribution of emergency supplies, screening, isolation care area physical setups and care guidelines, and numerous guidance documents for the care of the workforce. Disaster Health Services volunteers also took on the task of training non-healthcare professionals on the use of PPE. Welcome to Virtual Disaster Health Services. The only way we could do this with the number of clients that we helped over these months was to have a whole virtual workforce. So we used platforms of Microsoft Teams and SharePoint as our modem for interaction. We had staff both on the ground and virtually doing wellness checks with our clients. We have virtual client health record that was slightly different than our in-person health record. We made fillable forms for CMIST. CMIST is our worksheet to identify access and functional needs for clients, and is a philosophical approach to look at the needs of clients in sheltering that may be different from the medical model and a diagnosis-based system. We continued with aggregate morbidity to follow patterns and trends in epidemiology, which is also a fillable form that could be managed online. And then the disaster health staff, whether they were on the ground or virtually, would save these files into a single folder and email that folder to the Disaster Relief Operations Disaster Health Services Manager, or put it in a locked channel on the Teams platform. Many of our disaster health services managers were virtual. So what was non-congregate sheltering? The definition of non-congregate sheltering grew with the variations in the types of disasters, and over the summer with wildfires in particular, we ended up having hotels and motels, which were our base, but there were RV campgrounds, there were fairgrounds full of RVs and tents. We opened we're serving where there were cabins and kind of family campgrounds in parks. So we did have a whole variety of things that were non-congregate. We also did have reception centers periodically in the immediate aftermath of a system, where when we were going to be having people go to multiple non-congregate shelters, we would have a reception center where we could do COVID screening and to get the clients initially identified, and then to a safer single room or a cabin as quickly as possible. If you can see in the right lower corner of your screen, it's not as blown out as it would be helpful, but this was how we had some ideas to operate a health screening area. So we had to teach our staff, both our nursing staff and the shelter and logistics staff, exactly what had to happen if we were going to have to use congregate care, with welcoming signage, social distancing markers. We provided basic canteen services there so they could have food and water. We had screeners and tried to maintain a 6-foot distance from clients. And we had big signage for if you needed to go to isolation, if you had a temperature, if you were going to able to go straight to the congregate area or the exit. That was the only 3 ways to go. And that far right lower corner is a sampling of the disability integration kind of signs that you would need to help people with access and functional needs find the places within the building. Within a congregate shelter, we did create specific protocols. Each time a state, and we don't decide where the shelters are going to be. The state and the county and the local jurisdiction decides where those are going to be. And so when we were advised that there was only going to be one congregate shelter in this parish, for instance, then we would send a strike team, and that strike team is anywhere from 6 to 9 people, and we wanted one disaster health person on each strike team. And then if we were going to need, as soon as we knew we would need to open an isolation area, we would want to be sure there were 2. But then in the end, once it was all set up, we wanted 3 disaster health responders per shift as a minimum. One registered nurse per shift was preferred, and then a disaster health service responder. That could have been a paramedic or an EMT who would be near the entrance of the isolation care area at all times. And then all of our disaster health services responders would support the staff, all the workers that were on the ground. And our philosophy and our ability with the isolation care areas, this is not like the acute care. This were people who were capable of managing their self-care, who had a fever or had possibly had a recent exposure to COVID. So these were not people who needed any kind of direct care. Here's some examples of the signage we used just to help people find their way and to reinforce facial protection and distance, and where you would don and doff your PPE, reminders to our clients to report fevers, cough, or difficulty breathing. Staff health was critical to our disaster relief operations, although we did try and do 50% or more of our response teams were virtual for as many of the response groups that could be virtual. And that all of our disaster health responders, whether they were virtual or on-site, would act to support the staff. Workers on the site needed to be screened before they could enter the work site. Very common practice now, having their temperature taken and a short survey. They were advised they could not report to their work site if they were ill for any reason, and then our staff's health would follow up with them later. And we also created an internal process so that we were keeping track of COVID-19 positive tests and illness in employees or responders. So we kept track of all that as well. Finally, opportunities and challenges. I think the best opportunities were that nurses were really on the front lines of the development of the mission, policies, procedures, protocols, and operations. We had a seat at the table, and it was nurses who were involved with federal partners, such as FEMA, in planning for congregate and non-congregate sheltering for the country. And that was really, really quite rewarding. On the other side of this, non-congregate sheltering was very difficult to do. There were times over the season that we had over 40,000 people in over 3,000 hotel rooms. And we were trying to do wellness checks. We were trying to keep in touch with people. And that phone call of the wellness checks was not going well, because every other person with Red Cross, because you can't see each other as you would in a congregate setting, you have to call each other all the time. And the clients got kind of tired of being called by the American Red Cross. And we had to rethink that system and redesign it. And also the virtual environment is very stressful. I mean, in a disaster, in an operations center, for example, you can just walk across the room and say something to the shelter lead from the health lead or the disability integration lead, and you can sort out a problem right there on the floor. And in this system, you just can't do that. You had to go to a Teams setup or for a conference call, or you had to call or text or email, and everything took a lot longer. And for that, you know, in disaster, communication is always probably one of the hardest things to do, and in this case, it was much harder. That said, we have served thousands and thousands and thousands of clients this year, from multiple wildfires all up and down the Pacific coast to 27, I think, hurricanes that came through one way or another and raised our attention, and multiple other family fires and apartment fires as well. With that, that's my conclusion. That's what we did with the things we had available to us during COVID-19 and disaster response with the American Red Cross. Thank you.